So I said that there are a number of health issues that we need to get right. I guess in what I'm doing, I'm presenting, obviously, as I guess all presenters are, we're trying to paint broad stroke pictures so that we can, if I was talking to you individually about, what are you doing, then that would become the contextual question. But so that the principles and the practices I'm going to outline, this might depend on your model of church planting. It might depend on where you're church planting. It might depend on whether you are ordained or non-ordained. So I recognize that the reality of anything that I think we share is about what it looks like in your context is really important. What I've tried to say is that we've had a lot of church planting in Europe, a lot of church planting. And it's not too long ago where waves of church planting didn't do well. And we got to learn those lessons. And I think that the healthy foundations are about trying to say these 6 things are really important if we're going to plant better and be rooted in more than just, I've got a good idea, or, I think I'll just start something without thought. It doesn't mean that, you need a, college degree, or you need to have a deep level of, theology. I don't think that that's necessary to plant a church with. But I do think you need to have some engagement in all of these 6 principles. Otherwise, something will not be right. Whatever the model of church. So I ended up by talking about this idea of discernment and how this is becoming an important feature of just mission generally. And lots of people are writing about actually being attuned to the Spirit, discerning the way of God, being led by the Spirit. These are very important issues. And in one sense, it's very difficult to teach about it because, the Spirit blows where he or she wants to. You can't box the Spirit. That's the point. As soon as you think we've got a hold of the Spirit, then you're reminded that the Spirit's actually got a hold of you. But there is this sense in which we do need to learn to navigate in a new seascape. Alan Roxburgh writes in his book, The Missional Leader, which I like. It's a good book in many ways. He talks about the idea of catching the wind of the Spirit in the sail of the ship. So here's a little sailboat. And what he tries to say is, it's as if we're in the boat, and there's 2 things that we need. We need a rudder, because a rudder is going to keep us stable. And for me, an understanding of those things about theology, they're like my rudder. That I know about God, I know about God's work as a triune God. I know about the importance of the kingdom and creation and incarnation and holistic ministry. Those things that I've learned about God's work in the world are like the rudder. They keep me stable when all around me the weather conditions are changing. Does that make sense? The weather changes quickly. And in Europe, the weather has changed very quickly. So we need the rudder. And the rudder, if you like, is those things we know about God that are always true and will always be true of God. The wind in the sail is what makes the boat move. Movement. Being empowered to go where one needs to go. And so along with the rudder, we need the wind of the Spirit, the sail, to be filled up so that we're actually catching that wind to take us to the destinations where we need to go. I am not a sailor, but we do have the Irish Sea that thankfully separates us from England.
Hallelujah.
Sorry, Phil. This is a mutually agreed perspective. but from very different...
What love looks like.
But from very different perspectives also, you know. And when I have some friends who do sailing like this, one of the things they tell me is we've got to catch the wind. We've got to catch the wind if we're going to move to where we need to go. And so actually, true salesmen and women, they will mobilize the structure, the positioning of the sail in order to catch the movement of the wind that is always moving. And they enable the wind to fill the sail of the ship in order to catch the power it needs to move in the direction. And what Alan Roxburgh says in the Missional God, the Missional Leader book, is that actually we need to learn to catch the wind stream of the Spirit as we're navigating on seas with a rudder that we've never navigated on before. That the church in Europe finds itself in places it has not been before. So I love church history. You know I'm saying this because I'm going to say something controversial. And I like Wesley. I don't like the wig, but I like Wesley. You know, but Wesley was great for a modernistic time. Wesley was a modernist. There's some things I don't like about Wesley. He was a Tory. He didn't approve of the American Revolution, but he was hardly at home. But please don't record this. But actually, what was great about Wesley was his understanding of his times, an understanding of responding to the work of the Spirit and creating forms that were particularly helpful in the Wesley revival. I also don't want to say just because, you know, we're talking about, you know, 18th century revival, that there's nothing to be learned or nothing even to be replicated for 21st century. So I find myself in very small groups. We don't call them bands. Where I come from, bands is a very loaded thing. It's usually paramilitary bands. It's not good. But, you know, I think that there's things there we can learn. And I think that this is what history teaches us, that we learn from history our mistakes and we learn good practice. And so I'm a thorough Wesleyan, but I want to see what small groups might look like, you know, in the 21st century in post-Christendom Europe. What's that look like? And we've got to be careful not to idolize or careful to draw on methods that may not be appropriate for today. We could discuss whether Wesley's methods are appropriate for today or whether contemporary Methodism has actually been able to take some of the very important things that Wesley did and found ways to construct them today. I'm also conscious that we have to, we draw on church history to learn with conversation partners along the way. So that's not anti-Wesley. It's just like saying Wesley didn't live in post-Christendom Europe. Wesley did not live in postmodernism. And that's important to know. And try to rework something for a changing context, as Wesley no doubt would do today. No doubt. No doubt. And so that means that we have to catch the Spirit to try and say, what is it the Spirit saying to us today? Learning from the past, having a rudder, and also, as Alan Roxburgh says, deal with this problem. What's the problem? That actually, we've never lived in a post-Christian continent ever before. We've had pre-Christian. We've had different tribes that have been brought into Christendom, usually by force. You know, we've got a bad history there. Usually by force. Not always, but often. So as Estonia, Estonia was Christianized largely against its will in the early days of the first incorporations of the tribes and nations and peoples. And I think that that's true across most of the world. And so what Roxburgh reminds us is just like the early explorers, Columbus, Vasco da Gama, they set out into uncharted waters. And they couldn't rely on the old maps, because the old maps did not take them or navigate the places where the wind and the sail took them. In fact, they had to write new maps for a new seascape. So literally the maps of the world, if you look at 16th, 17th century, 15th, 16th, 17th century, new maps of the world were written that reflected the discoveries that were made on the way. What Roxburgh says, I think very helpfully, is we actually need to learn to have the rudder, the wind of the Spirit in the sail, but pioneering in church planting in post-Christian contexts will mean lots of pioneers are writing them new maps for the new seascape as we go. We're in uncharted territory. And the old maps may have been good 100 years ago, but new maps will need to be written to navigate the new seascape. And for that, we need the rudder of the truth of God and the Spirit, and some companions who are out there on the seascape writing the maps as they go. This is adventure. I love it. And I'm scared too. One of the things that's happening in church planting circles, therefore in Europe, is drawing upon any lessons that we may have learnt when we sent missionaries into foreign countries. So often mission agencies insisted on an enculturation process as they went to start churches in other countries. So for example, when English missionaries or British missionaries or American missionaries or people from Western nations, the colonialists, would go into another turf, then they often had to do certain things that would help them become enculturated. And what Roxburgh says is that maybe we could learn, as we create new maps, to do some of the things that we insisted that we did with missionaries who went overseas, that those missionaries who went overseas to be prepared for a new people, a new language, a new culture, as they had to learn and prepare for that, at home for the long term, for lots of our churches that need to be planted and replanted in our nations, we could draw upon the lessons that are learnt for the missionaries that are now stay home. Because missionary is not just someone over there. Mission is about everyone to everywhere. So I just want to kind of say these quickly, and then I'm going to have some questions and answer time about this whole first thing. To me, these are other healthy practices. So here's what you would do if you were sent by your missionary department to go to another country. You'd be told to do these things. And actually what I'm advocating is, right here in post-Christian, post-modern Europe, we actually need to learn the same missionary skills all over again, but at home in our own towns and cities, because the seascape has changed. We need to navigate in a new way. So I'll just mention them briefly, because there are several. They're in your notes. Page 12. Unless you don't have page numbers, then it's that picture. So we have to learn the local language and mediums of communication. Now, the local language might not be another vernacular language, but it might be. It might be that some people, where they are, literally have to learn another language, because the movement of people or the change of the city has meant that actually, for example, I have a friend that who's just planting in a a city in the States. And him and his church planting team have discovered that over the last 4 years that the Hispanic movement of people into his city has meant that the church has found itself in now a 90% Hispanic community. And so they've all gone, non-Spanish speakers, to learn Spanish. Just communication is important. So it might mean doing that. It might mean that it's not learning a new vernacular, but there's language that isn't only vernacular. There's like street language. There's language of the turf. You know, the way people talk about things that they get and you don't get, that type of thing. It's trying to understand what it means to communicate well and to explore the means of communication. I think that's really important. If you're working with millennials today, then you'll need to understand social media. You'll probably need to engage with it. Unless it's off the devil, but you'll need to. It's a different language. You know, the language is emoli, isn't it? That's the language. Little smiley face, thumbs up. That's the language my 18-year-old communicates in. Sure, I wish he could speak normally too. But it's his language. And he communicates with people all over the country by various means. I think he thinks Instagram is sent from God. Do you understand what I'm saying though? It's a language issue. And whatever the people, we need to understand the forms of communication and how things are communicated. So in Ireland, we're storytellers. We love stories. In other parts of the world, it's concepts matter more than story. So in Ireland, we just think if we tell a story, you may get the concept. We don't think, let's give you the concepts. The second thing is what I've hinted at in the Pauline story, observing and discerning the worldview, the cultures, the values, and the ethics. And so you may have seen this, but so this is quite common in missiology. The cultures are observable by what they do, behavior, norms. But underneath that comes values that actually manifest themselves in behavior. And to really understand what's going on there, you need to get to the world view, how literally people view the world. And so sometimes the church tends to misjudge or only look at the external, the obvious sets of behaviors, the customs, the cultures, things like that. But what we need to do is dig deep down as to say, where does this come from? And it comes from a set of values in every society. And the values come from a particular view of the world. And in mission, whether it's church planting or any other form of mission, we need to really get the world view so that we can understand why behaviors are behaviors and values are values. And if we don't, if we only look at the behavior, we'll not understand well enough how to connect with people. We will have our assumption of their worldview. Another thing that this is what missionaries are taught all over the world. Apart from when I've actually talked to missionaries who went across the world, they said these are the things we were supposed to be taught. So understanding local customs, rituals, and traditions are very important. Why do people do things the way they do in this place? So when we were planting a church, I call it a missional community, in a Muslim context, none of us had experience of working with Islam. Yet we had British press that told us what Muslims were like. You know, they were evil, basically. But it was the right-wing press. So I'm not being politically neutral here, you know. But But we had to learn, because God told us he was going to take us into this particular school. It was a Muslim school. We had to really polish up in Islam. We had to polish up on learning about Muslim family life, about cultures, behaviors. We attended mosque several times to understand what that looked like. Is anyone going to condemn me yet? Okay. So we met with the imams to learn a little bit about Muslim theology, not just a Christian version of Islam theology. You know, learning it from Muslims was interesting. We also learned social habits, and we learned how families engaged. You know, I'd never heard of halal food before. I thought someone was saying hallelujah food. I didn't know. And we got in touch with an organization who helped train us to be aware of Islamic culture. And actually, the 6 forms of Islamic culture and the different traditions within Islam, this was all new. What? Islam is Islam, right? No. Christianity is Christianity, right? No. It's good versions. And we did that in preparation so we didn't make big mistakes of assumptions. And we give dignity to the faith of the other. So that with our colonial and imperialist history, where most Muslims are suspicious of Christians, we haven't had a good history there, that we had to prepare ourselves to understand the worldview, the values, and the behavior. And I tell you what, it made all of the difference as we approached this Muslim school and worked there for 7 years patiently to establish a Christian community in that school, where I am the chaplain of the school with the imam, and where we were invited to come in and do the counselling after the Manchester bomb, which was very significant in Manchester, where I am, because we were safe and we could be trusted, and because we respected Islam and weren't there to dismantle it, but we were there to share Jesus. In fact, the great thing that happened in this school was when, unknown to me, the school website was rewritten, and it was announced to all of the Muslim families that we were now the school's Christian church partner. And that was, when someone owns you, then you're into something special there. When someone says, we authenticate you and we endorse you, to me that's a good thing, rather than saying, we will impose this on you. It's not the Jesus way. And so we went in and we had to learn some hard lessons. When I met with a group of Muslim boys who were age 10, in a session, asked the vicar about, the vicar, wow, that's what they call me, the vicar, about Christianity. I had my Christology, my pneumatology. I had my understanding of the Bible and why it was different to the Quran. I had all of that nicely tucked in, prepared. And so I asked the boys, what do you want to ask me? Do you know what the first question was? Why do you hate us? Wow. Like, I wasn't prepared for that. The second question was, I mean, this is gospel. The second question was, why does Hollywood portray every terrorist as a Muslim in their movies? But I've got my Christological question now. I've got my Septuagint, and, that was interesting. And then the third thing was, why do Christian women wear short skirts? That was funny. Because they all laughed, like child do. And I thought, but actually that was an interesting perception. So I kind of, honestly, I got through that session and I came out, I got my team together and says, guys, we're miles off. We're miles off. And so we went and we then learned these things about culture and tradition and to understand why they were asking these questions. Because how were they ever going to embrace us if they perceived us as the enemy and that we were only there to convert them? I could talk to you a lot more about that. from a guy who grew up in Belfast and never saw a Muslim, this was God's most funniest joke in my life. Shutka for Russians. So we need to understand cultures and people, and that takes hard work. Yeah, you can say, I'm not going to bother. I've got Jesus, and that's all that matters. That's actually, it sounds spiritual, but Jesus became embodied in a cultural form. God took the time to engage in a moment of history, in a particular culture, in a particular language, embracing particular cultural forms. God never bypasses incarnation. It is his way. So I've got Jesus. I don't need to do any of that stuff. You're just being non-incarnational. Best of luck. We need to identify significant places and spaces. Where do people meet? Why is this an important place? So I look around. When I came here, I looked around the old town. And I was looking for significant places. And the significant places had like markers on the wall or little plaques up saying about the significance of this street or the significance of who lived here. And actually, if we're going to be enculturated, we need to know the history and the background of places because they have a symbolic significance for people's lives. And it's a courtesy to culture to do it. It's a courtesy. I'm glad some of the plaques had English as well as Estonian. We need to look for people of peace, and I think Phil talked about this. Yeah. You know those people that God send to us, who I primarily think of people of peace. These are people that are, for me, receptive to Christians in a way that will open doors across networks and communities for them. They are gatekeepers. They open up the gates and networks for the gospel, even if they don't know this yet. I met lots of those people. They're favorably disposed to who you are and what you're going to do. And this is looking for these people. And I find most of these people in my own planting work, not in the church. If you find peace in the church, can you let me know? I'll come. No. I find these people in the community. They usually are community leaders. Maybe not by titles, but by influence. Influence. If some of these people become Christians, this is good news. You work the network. A thing that I feel really passionate about is about, I've been thinking about this for about 3 months now. It's about learning to be a guest and a host. Now, I believe in Christian hospitality. I think it's great that we open up our homes and our churches are very welcoming places. But in this article, which you'll find referenced, this missionary says, hospitality is really important and hosting is really important and hosting well at our homes. He said, but Jesus' hospitality was more about being hosted than hosting. The true hospitality takes place when the power shifts from you being a host to becoming a guest. Do you get that? So think about Jesus. His most significant encounters were not when he hosted, but when he was a guest somewhere else. And what this writer's saying, drawn on Jürgen Moltmann, who's my favorite theologian, love him. I mean, he's completely heretical and orthodox in the same page, in the same sentence. I love him. He says that true hospitality in the Christian church is expressed when the church learns the humility and posture of being hosted by the other, and not just when we host the other. That hospitality is allowing yourself to be hosted where the privilege is given to you and you are welcomed as the guest. And therefore, there's no agenda because you're the host, or you call the shots because you're the host, or it's on your turf, or on your terms or on your agenda, when you abandon that and say, hospitality means I will be your guest, and the power belongs to someone else, that's when true hospitality is seen. Read Jesus and see the significant moments come when he's a guest. And I think that there's something really good about that. When churches learn not just to invite the community into it, but learn to accept the invitations from the community to join it, then we're talking about hospitality that's going somewhere. This is a shift. It's not either or. But I think there is something good about your community saying, will you join us? And you saying, yes. Or a non-Christian friend saying, would you come to my house? They're usually called Zacchaeus or something, you know. I think we need to develop some strategic partnerships. Church planting is like something we all got to do together. One of the good things I love about one form of church planting across Europe is the fresh expressions of church. I talk about that in the workshop. But one of the things I like about it is that people are actually working together to supply shared resources. You do not have to be, on your own. And so looking for networks, for resources, for groups of people that you can work with who, as Paul says, can supply what is lacking in you is a good thing. And the more we do that with the generosity that we can give to others and be gracious enough to receive from others and say we haven't got it all sorted, the better. Partnership is critical. And then the last thing I would say, and then you can come back with some questions on anything I've said so far. And anything you disagree with, that's okay too. We can talk about what we disagree about, and then I'll tell you why you're wrong. And I'll talk about this in the second part, really. But we need to develop support systems for sustainability and accountability, particularly in pioneering and people out there, with a new seascape sailing, or the people exploring unexplored territory, while they need to be supported. I mean, there's nothing worse, using a different analogy, which I don't really like, but there's nothing like, putting troops on the ground and having no supply chains and people feeling isolated or not resourced on the ground. The resources might vary depending on what you're doing, how you're doing it, and what you need. But actually, we need to make sure we help our planters and our planted teams. And for those starting new churches, whatever they are, in homes or in communities, whatever way, we need to make sure good support systems are in place. Because pioneering is a lonely pursuit and a difficult pursuit. And Satan hates it. Satan hates it. This is not the time to tell you that people that engage in church planting usually get more ill than anybody else. Take this off the video, please. This is not good news. But we need support, and we need help, and we need sustainability systems, and we need accountability for our own sake. I used to think when I was 25 that accountability was a bad thing. These were people getting in my way and stopping me doing what I'm doing. But I've come to learn that actually these people were helping save me from me and save me from my own thinking and ways. And that actually, although there can be a form of accountability that is about control, and that's not good, I've learned that actually I need people to talk to. And Phil talked admirably about this yesterday, about the importance of accountability. When we cease to be accountable, in my experience as a human being, my darker side tends to take over. So I've got to watch that. So I'm not knocked out of the game, even as I'm trying to help start churches with others. I'm not disqualified for the prize. So the last slide I will say, then we'll do some questions, and then I'll move into the second bit. What I've tried to say about getting foundations right is, at least this would be my argument. An important consideration, therefore, for church planting is not just to plant numerous churches. Like, we've done that. It doesn't matter how many churches you plant, I don't think. What I think does matter is to consider what type of churches we're planting, for whom, and why. These are the healthy foundations. Not the number of churches, but what types of churches, for whom, and why are we doing it? That's better thinking. Further, we need to ask how and where these new churches are to be planted as they are formed in and emerge from particular contexts, yet always remain true to the unchanging gospel. So the gospel doesn't change, but the context changes all of the time. These are some of the issues I've tried to outline in this first session. And in the second session, I will build upon these foundations. So this is the time to have your questions and or your feedback about what you're hearing. If you've got something to throw at me, please make sure it's gentle. Question.
I have one question. You mentioned social media, but I was wondering, should we have more training in terms of church growth on these topics? Because as I heard those different things we should consider, there was communication. Young people are communicating on social platforms. There was important places. There are important places online where people are gathering, and there was people of peace and influence, and it's on online platforms. Should we prepare church leaders, youth ministers, young people, teenagers more in becoming influencers, in becoming YouTubers, in becoming more aware of how to use these options to plant those seeds in the culture? It's not maybe about church planting right away, but it's about planting those seeds.
So, I think, it's a big question. Thank you. I speak for myself and not anybody else. I don't speak for an institution. I just tell you what I think. I like Paul's phrase about, reaching people by all means for the gospel. So I'm not anti-Facebook. I don't think it's a wrong thing, but I think it could be used wrongly. I think that Instagram could be used wrongly. And what I certainly think is there are lots of problems with social media we need to take seriously. There can be an influence or a power behind them that isn't great. There can be manipulation. There can be pressure. A lot of people's health for young people can be seriously damaged by engagement of the interaction in social media. So I think that it's not like this is the best thing from God. This is a very complex issue. What I would want to say is that millennials and post-millennials, this is their world. It is their major form of engagement in the world. Now, it's certainly in communication. And I think that we need to understand it, we need to use it, we need to be aware of the dangers of it. I think we need good discipleship. I know one or two groups in the Salvation Army who've got excellent training in discipleship about discipling people who are online. I don't mean doing it online, but aware of the dangers and aware of that. And their approach is, this is part of the world of the millennials. To say don't engage in it is completely unrealistic. Let's think about how to do this safely, to do this well, and to also create boundaries and accountability so that we can mitigate against some of the worst abuses, but also take the opportunities that it also affords to communicate the gospel globally in seconds or minutes, any place, any time. So I think with those caveats, I think it's another tool. I think we can use it. There's a dark side, and we have to watch that. But even if you didn't use social media, there's still a dark side to youth engagement and young people bullying each other face to face. So the answer is not non-use, but proper use.
That's exactly my point, that I think that we should train people more.
Yeah.
Because even non-Christians, they understand more and more that it's all good. And if the church can become a place of teaching about how to use this healthily, and then make bridges to, the community of real people in the church, then this could be one platform to reach people and to
Absolutely.
provide value that they need and to connect them to the church. Maybe.
Yeah, I would say so. I do. So I'm going to speak for me. I do. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for these insights. This is really very, very helpful. A big question of discernment, in my view, is the question when there is an existing church in the community already, or in the town, like this church in Tallinn. So when it is reasonable, or more reasonable, more meaningful to start a new church plant somewhere in Tallinn, or when the same thing might be accommodated very well into the Tallinn church with a new ministry.
Yes.
New kind of ministry or something. So, which would be church development or developing the current active church. And how do you decide it is better to have a church plant rather than just a new program or new ministry inside this current church?
So I can't speak about this current church because I don't know it, but I can talk about how old is the church here? How old is this church? Do we know? How many years in existence is this?
90-something.
So if the church, so we need churches that will start churches. So a lot depends on whether the DNA in this, I can say this neutrally, you understand? So whether the DNA of the church is that actually we want to multiply and be a church planting church. And if that's the case, then there's an advantage already to say there is an expectation, or there could be an expectation that the normative thing this church might do, if this is part of the setup, is that as we were planted, we will naturally want to plant in other places. The problem becomes if the church doesn't have that mentality, but wants to either grow and grow and grow and do new ministries and doesn't want to start other churches, but wants to become like a mega church, for example, in the city. And sometimes the answers to these questions aren't easily done in a room like this. But be like sitting down with the leaders and saying, like, what is the objective? How could Tallinn be reached with the gospel? And I think if Tallinn's going to be reached by the gospel, it will need multiple churches. There's multiple quarters, there's multiple sections. So it will need other churches to reach other people for whom this church is not well placed. I know that. Even without knowing it, I know that. So the question is, does the existing church say, yes, we want to foster, cultivate, intentionally strategize in order to make that happen? And if it doesn't, are there other Christians in the city from other denominations or other Methodists who have a passion in this city for seeing the gospel develop across the city, who will say, well, actually, this is our passion and we need to do something about this? I would always like to think this could be done in agreement and not in, disagreement. We're starting out of bad places. But one of the things that I would say that I've seen across cities is that where churches have a citywide passion, then they might create new churches through multi-sites or through other means. And this is a good thing for the existing church and a good thing for the spread of the gospel in the city. So if I was a member of this church and I was thinking, I would love to do this and we should be doing this, I would hope that there would be agreement and support and a strategy to work that out that took consideration as to what we're doing now and what's sustainable and when's the right time and how do we prepare for this. And then I would say that if they said, well, that's not what we're going to do, then I would do it anyhow. If I had a house here, I'd open up my house and begin one there. I'd do it anyhow. I'm not waiting on the church to set the agenda. The agenda has been set. Take the gospel to all of the nation. And so where it can be worked out well, that's good. Where it can be done as a win-win strategy, that's got to be good. And so if we can explore that, that's great. But there are lots of people out there, no doubt, who are waiting for the recipients. They're waiting as recipients for the gospel. And we might not always have time to wait and wait and wait until something happens. I don't know how many Methodist churches there are in Tallinn. But my view is, is there one Methodist church? 2? So why can't you have 10? Why can't you have 20? Absolutely. Why not? That's the strategy, right? That's the strategy. And I think it's about less building church. It's about less building church. And it's not about our seating capacities. It's about our sending capacity. It's about, remember, go is the first part of the Great Commission. That's, to me, to make disciples and form churches, that happens on the going. So we just need to learn to release people. And statistics show for every church that releases people to go into church planting, the mother church becomes recipient of at least the same amount of people because God honors planting. I believe that wholeheartedly, and I've seen it. It's a long answer to a question without being too political about it. But, if a city has got very few evangelical churches witnessing to the grace of Jesus here, like you need a of churches, not an additional one. Is the pastor of the church here in the room? Okay. Question?
I just want to find out your view on this. When a multinational company sets up a subsidiary, at some point in time, the multinational company thinks it wants to adopt some principles or practices of the subsidiary company into the parent company. That is called reverse diffusion.
Yeah.
What's your view on the church, either in Europe or wherever else, thinking of such a principle, adopting such a principle?
Reverse mission.
For example, the gospel was sent from Europe to Africa, to many other parts of the world. What's your view on that?
It's in my workshop. For those who are at the workshop, I talked about. For those who are in the workshop, we did about 25 minutes in answering this question, and we'll talk about it then.
Can you give it small, please?
Well, the answer is that small, okay. So we know that the global South, through reverse mission and diaspora movements, these are two different things but related, are coming to host cultures where they have got traditional or historical links, or are coming to people groups within the nation, similar people groups, reverse diaspora, with a desire to plant the gospel or to Christianize or to help the host nation reach its people. So, and the two statements I give that were simple, for those who are wondering, I still don't get it. It'd be like a friend of mine who came to one of my classes in Manchester. He said, I'm Apostle John or something. I went, wow, I didn't know the Apostle John was black Ghanaian, yay! And he said, I'm Apostle John, I'm from Ghana, and are you from Ghana?
I'm Apostle Paul from Ghana.
Apostle Paul. The good news, I've got bad news for you. I mean, the Apostle John lived to an old age, and Paul got his head cut off. I think that, you know, swap your name, you know. You do John Paul, you could be the Pope. So he said to me, I've come to Manchester to help you evangelize the Britons. And that was his passion, and he loved it. He was sent from a church in Ghana to help to reach our people. That was like a reverse mission. He had a long legacy of English-speaking missionaries who came to Ghana. I also have a friend who is from Redeemed Christian Church of God, who's Nigerian. And he said, we're going to start a church for the host culture, but primarily we're best placed to reach Nigerians. So I talk about the pros and the cons of all of this in the workshop. And I think both things are necessary. I think what we need to do in the West is to realize that we don't know everything, that actually we've made our own mistakes. My concern is that from the ex-colonies, we don't have an approach to mission that becomes a reverse colonization or a reverse cultural clash, so that the difficulty with Nigerians who in England cannot reach outside Nigerians is because they've not done the hard work on reaching culture and understanding culture. So it can work. It's a valuable part of church planting. They bring with them a great optimism of faith, a belief in the supernatural. That's good for Europeans, by the way. Honestly, that's really important. But as these principles, learning the culture, I say to my brothers who are Nigerians, guys, if you want to reach people in Manchester and Birmingham who are not Nigerians, you need to understand your own cultural assumptions, your own cultural forms of worship, which is why people are not coming to your church. I know this church. And you're going to have to do the hard work. And the truth is, I think the second and the third generations will get it. So you need to be gatekeepers for the second and third generations.
What is your experience with churches giving birth to new churches as opposed to churches that are being planted out of kind of independent initiatives or even by some denominational decision?
So, I mean, in my view, denominations don't plant churches. They may have a strategy for church planting, but I think it always happens with local people or groups of churches that have a passion and a burden to do it. So denominations often set goals for church planting, but when I'm looking around in my denomination, how's the denomination planted churches? Actually, they didn't plant churches. You know, Trevor or Brian or Joyce or Jill, they planted churches, and they happened to be in the denomination. And then when they did, their stories were told, and the denomination was applauded. That's just my own denomination. So I think that churches should always, if you're a new church, I think it's a good desire to plant a new church within 5 years. The longer you leave the planting of a church in a new church, the harder it's going to be. Because you'll just become a non-church planting church. That's my experience. So I think we do want to use, I'm not anti-denominational. Yeah, I might be. I'm not anti-denomination. I love my denomination. But sometimes they don't facilitate mission. They kind of kill it or hinder it, even though they don't mean to. Because I've got lots of tick lists, you know, those things. And I don't fit the structures well. So I think that if we're thinking denominational church planting, this means groups of people or individuals within that denomination who will be released or empowered or have a vision or burden to plant churches. That's what we mean. There is no denominational church planting, I think, in that sense. People reach people. In terms of whether it's local people in a local church or independent people, I believe in partnership. I've stayed within my denomination, which is Church of the Nazarene, for all my life. I've had points of tension. There are times I didn't obey the rules. There are times I should have obeyed the rules. There are times when I helped them write new rules. And so I like to do it in good spirit, in harmony. And I like to I like to try and work with my denomination to try and become what it can become. And so in that sense, I am denominational, but I don't care about the denomination as a name or as a brand or its reputation. I mean, goodness. You know, if the Church of Nazarene is known as like a terrible group of people who hangs out with sinners, I like that reputation rather than some of the reputations that I'm now hearing about, particularly in North America. So I probably not answering your question, but I'm trying to say that it's people that start churches, and churches should start churches. And I think that when that happens, that's when movements occur. Movement never occurs from the center, ever. So I look for people on the margins or fringes, even with the existing churches, or churches that might have a bit of a radical edge to them. And I think, I think these places could go somewhere, rather than try and move the whole center to become a denomination of church planting. Plant on the fringes and the center will change. Start at the center and you'll be there a long time. That's my experience. I haven't time to waste. Just get on with it. A few more questions and I'll say some other things. Yeah?
How much or how important is it to look into a certain age range, for example, because you say understand the local custom, rituals and so on, and you talked about, for example, social media. So is it for church planting important to focus on a certain age range, for example, or where you planted, in which area of the town, because you're poorer, you have wealthier? Because I think that also has something to do maybe with the people who plant.
Yes.
And how much you can even relate with your own background. So try to be always a youth type of person. If you're 60 plus, it's maybe difficult.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So Stuart Murray Williams has this diagram that he uses for church planting. I haven't time to shade all of this in. This is my artwork. This will be hanging up with the other artwork at the end of the day. He says that church planting often takes, you might think, is this answering your question? But let me get to your question for this. I would say as a preface, church planting can be for demographic or geographic or both. So demographic is for a particular type of people. I think that's okay. It's got some dangers. It's got a homogeneity about it that maybe isn't helpful. But, you know, there are people planting churches. You know, goths for goths, young people for young people, skateboarders for skateboarders. There's a lot of that going on out there, and that demographic. Online would be another demographic, because not everybody will engage online. Geographic is more to do with a physical location, of which a geographic plant will be made up of many different factors. Which part of the city, which part of the town. And there could be a combination of a demographic within a geographic plant. And so Murray says that in terms of the relationship between the planter and what or where something's planted, three things should always come into consideration. One, can you see that board? Is that okay?
No.
It's got wheels. Woohoo! If I talk from behind here, most of you think I should stay behind here, I know. Can you see this now? Because if you can't, you need to move this time. So he talks about there needs to be an intersection between three things. One, an understanding of the context. That actually wherever you're planting, so well as an online a virtual environment, it's still a context. If it's a house church, it's presumably in a neighborhood, and presumably there would be some attempt to connect with neighbors in the neighborhood in some way. It has a context. It might also be made up of particular people who may all be educated or whatever. There's usually a demographic in house group meetings as well. And the people that go to them are often like the people that run them. That's the truth. Not always, but that's the truth. So there's a context everywhere. The second thing he says that there needs to be enough conviction of things that are important to you that you cannot live without. So for me, it might be like, if I'm going to be involved in church planting, like I'm never going to be involved in church planting that in some way doesn't reach marginalized people. Like for me, that's a non-negotiable as a Wesleyan, that actually I have to be found somewhere amongst the poor. I can't spend my whole life amongst, white class professionals. I'll die. The third thing he says is there's also going to be constraints. He says, be realistic. There are going to be things that you'd rather not have in place. And there may be constraints that are put down by a denomination, or constraints that are things that you're just going to have to live with. He says, wherever you plant, geographically, demographically, or online, or whatever the context, you have to have more conviction than you have constraint if you're going to connect with the context. And if your convictions don't connect with the context, you need to find a new context or to ask God to give you a bigger heart for where you are. You're never going to have a perfect scenario. There's always going to be constraints wherever you are, things that hold you back. But your convictions have got to be way more important than your constraints. You cannot get out of bed every day thinking, we can't do this, I can't do this, we can't do this. You've got to know how the fundamental passions you have are able to be realized within the planting that you're involved in. So Murray's useful here, I think, because he recognizes there's always a context. He recognizes there are passions within the planter that are God-given and need to be realized. And he also recognizes you aren't going to get it your own way. There are things that you're going to have to learn. There are things that you could rather do without. And so you've got to make sure that the convictions are greater than the constraints. And in the intersection of these three things, we find out where we plant and who we are as a planter. Does that help your question? Oh, I almost prefer this in slides, don't you, Phil? We just like it. In fact, we might just do this at the end. Stuff this. You got the slides for the next one. Don't worry about them. Any other questions? Yeah?
Is there a limit to how incarnational we should be? In the sense of, so I'm applying this to my own practice. So the constraints, I think one of them identified is how much modern culture is focused on sin. In the sense of, so my own practice is I've met people that I feel God has called me to come alongside and to evangelize too, but the culture that they inhabit is to take all the money that they've earned in the week and to spend it on going out clubbing. Mm-hmm. The one aim is to dance sexually with a member, another person, and then to try, obviously, to take that to its obvious conclusion. And so I've gone to these places because I feel a call, that's what Jesus did. He went to places where people were. But I don't want to agree, or I don't know what it is, to agree with this culture which is focused on this thing. I've become the guest. I've gone into homes, but their hearts haven't seemed to change. I was wondering if you could recommend what do you think about the situation, whether I should stop. Is that a constraint that is legitimate?
So I can't tell you what you should do, and I wouldn't but wouldn't presuppose to say what you should do. Because actually, you got to work that out with godly counsel and with prayer and with the Spirit. And unless I have a word for you, then I don't. But what I can say, the article on incarnational guest, you should read that if you've got the slide. It's a very helpful thing. It talks about the limitations of incarnational language. Because, we cannot be, first of all, the incarnation is unique. The danger of incarnational language is that we can take it too far. We are the body of Christ, but we're not the incarnation. That's a one-time, unique historical event. God has become flesh in one person in history, and we are not God in flesh. So we've got to be careful about even the paradigms of incarnation and how far to press it. And the article deals with all of that. What I would say is, as general parameters, is there are some places where I think if they're leading, so let me talk personally. I think that if I want to reach clubbers, then I may need to understand the culture. I may need to visit the clubs. I might enjoy clubbing. I don't. I'm way too old. Seriously. I put earplugs in, But if there's a place also where this begins to undermine who I am, and I feel uncomfortable with this, then I need to think of incarnation in a different way. That I don't become one of them. That actually, at that point, I may have relational connections that are very incarnational, but I may not have the same expression of behaviors. So I'm incarnational in a different way, not in the exact same way. In the same way, when I meet with people who recover from alcohol addiction, a lot of alcohol addiction in my family, I never would say, you know what, I think you should go back into pubs and clubs, and that's not going to be good for them. And so they have to make a decision, is how do they find the places where they engage in their networks? And they normally do it for a 12-step meeting, or they do it at a place where there is a shared space, where everyone in this space is equally at home. And that would be the AA meeting. And that would not be in the pub and club. So they find relational ways to be with people in genuine ways where the space or manifestation of what happens here becomes a critical problem for them. And I think, as I said, I think that's something you have to work out. So if you read the article, don't press it too far. Countercultural living is very important. It's the balance of in the world and not off it. But I think that have good wisdom around you as to know at what point, even for right motive, do you become vulnerable in a way that actually is dangerous for you. And I think I don't know what that is for you, but I do know that if you've got genuine friendships and you understand that world, they won't spend all of their life in the club. There are other ways and other places to be a genuine friend. And they might actually also respect why you're not there. Is that okay? I wish you well. One question, and I'm going to put up a couple of slides just to show you some diagrams. Sorry, two questions, one and then two. Sorry.
So I'm going to context in July. I've already been given a constraint, but I'm not sure because I haven't been there, so I don't know whether it's a constraint or not. But it is definitely catering to ourselves from the unhealthy.
Are you from the north of Ireland?
I'm from the Kerry.
Well, you can speak loudly then. Also, Irish people like to speak. Yes! Stand up and do a dance and everything.
Okay. All the things I don't like doing. Right?
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I'm going somewhere in July. A constraint has been put on me that my boss is saying, we'll open a cafe. And I'm going but maybe a cafe is not the right thing. So can you give me language that's not going to absolutely disrespect him, but me saying, well, can you wait until I get there before you start suggesting that we can do church in this way?
That takes me to a little slide here, actually. Because it sounds like they've got the model before you get there. And so I would give him my slides. Is he Irish?
Yes, he's from Fermanagh.
From Fermanagh?
He's a farmer.
Right, okay. They can take blunt.
Okay.
From Fermanagh, it's honestly the most Frank-speaking people in the north of Ireland. So, like, if this goes wrong, please don't look me up. But Phil said, but actually, it's the truth. I actually think there is a conversation there. And it might be that you find, you know what, that actually is an expression that you're comfortable with. Like, see, for me, like, I love cafe culture. I planted more churches in cafe culture than any other thing. I just love it. If I get to heaven and it's not a cafe, I'm in trouble, seriously. But if you've got genuine friendship, if you're being sent, this diagram is important. And whether there's a win-win or whether there is, well, could I have an opportunity to explore first and see if that's one of the areas that I may engage with? If there's no flexibility whatsoever and that's what you're doing, then actually you need to say, this is way too big a constraint for my convictions and I'm not doing it. And in Fermanagh, that will be respected even if it's not adhered to. That's a very localized picture between two Irish people there. You know, but look for the win-win. Look for win-win. Sometimes we create problems by not trying to look at a way and understand why they are asking this and where it's coming from. And then if you've got what do you have a passion? Can I ask you that? That's very public, I know.
Unchurched people.
Unchurched people?
Everybody, just gathering people
Okay.
together and sharing Jesus, hospitality, and just being incarnational.
So
Every second of your life.
So I mean, cafe may lend itself to do that, but whether that is a cafe drinking culture. You know, there are people who try and start cafe churches where they don't drink coffee, and it doesn't go very well. It's an alien culture, but by and large, it is a popular culture. I'm just thinking about what that looks like, and whether the types of things you're passionate for may or not be connected to a cafe thing. But it may. Please, God, work it out. Okay, question, and then I'm going to just show you a couple of pictures.
We'd like to know just some practical experience of yours about church planting. For example, because in bigger city, there is multicultural contexts. Could you give at least one good example of church planting?
In multiculturalism, in a multicultural context.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that I was talking to you about working in a community where Islam was 90% of the community. It was, I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but that was my most interesting multicultural experience, because the culture had regular British people. It had an influx of immigration from Muslims from Pakistan, primarily Pakistan. It also had a strong Hindu population and a bit of a Buddhist. Buddhism was also there. I think the question was how we did church there.
Yeah, how you planted in a church. For example, here in Tallinn we have also one really big part of Tallinn,
Yeah.
where mostly 90% are Russian.
Yeah.
And also refugees, etc. So could you give a practical example how you planted in a church in this kind of area?
Well, this is good. I just context. So I'll talk about the city that I was in. Is that okay? Manchester, because I can't talk about another context because that's where. So it's an interesting story because we actually went on a prayer walk around the city, and we were working out like Paul, like looking for the idols and trying to understand the culture. We were trying to work out who lives here, what are they like. So this may or may not be a helpful story. But we arrived into the Muslim sector of the city. And we came to a mosque, and we came to a school, a Muslim school. And we said, we're just going to pray here. And we prayed, And a voice said to us, "You will be here." So I said to my two colleagues, "Who said you will be here?" And they said, "You just told us you will be here." So we were having this discussion, who said it, who said it? And then, like Paul, we concluded that God may have asked us to come over here and help. And so they had a vote. There's 3 of us. And the 2 young adults, because I normally start churches with young adults, the 2 young adults agreed that I should make the first approach and that they could see how that went. And so I did a bit of research about the Muslim quarter. All the things I talked about, I learned lots of things because I was going to make an approach to this community, thinking God was calling me to this community. Then I had to do my homework to find out about the community, so I wasn't being ignorant about things I was doing. So literally, I got in touch with the imam and said, "I think God wants me to meet you." He said, "Alan!" We met. And we met. I said to the head teacher of the Muslim school, I didn't tell him we were praying outside his school, but I did say I wanted to meet him as a community worker. So the imam was religious, so I could talk that. The head teacher, politics. I said, "I need to meet you as a community worker." So we went in and we had a conversation. And I said, God is called. I didn't say God's called. I said, I believe that I'm going to be in this community to help bless this community. To bless it. Not to Christianize it, but to bless it. He said, well, we just decided yesterday that we need to open up our school so that Muslim children learn more about non-Muslim people in the community. Could you help us with this? And my voice said, "You will be here. You will be here." So then I said, here's the Bible, follow Jesus, and no. I said, the truth is, I was praying as he was talking to me, thinking, God, I've no idea what to say. So then I said, yes, sure, we can help you. What do you need help with? I said, like, name it. There's 3 of us on our team, like 3 people in church planting. Me, Silas, and Timothy, right? 3 of us. They're not called Silas and Timothy. Yeah. He said to me, well, actually, our nursery ground, where children play in this school, is full of glass. The children have not been able to play in a safe place for 6 months. We're going to get a team of parents, but we've no one in the community who might come and help us. Could you get a community team to come and help us clean this up? I said, sure. He said, great. It's in 2 weeks' time. I'm thinking, sure, God, there's me and 2 others. We're great, I'm going to get a team. And, we shook hands and that was it. I said, we will be there. We will work with you, alongside you, to help you and us to be together, to actually work and do something good to bless this community. This is a kingdom thing. I didn't say it's a kingdom thing, but I knew it was. So I went outside, I met my 2 young adult friends and said, guess what? In 2 weeks' time, we're going to go and meet with the Muslim parents and we're going to work together to do something good to bless this school. So I said we get a team of 20 to help them. I said, so that means you've got to get 10 and you've got to get 10 because you voted for me to go in. You know what? The university, young adults, well connected, right? They got 10 people each. I said, come and help us to bless this school. So we had a team of 21 of all ages. Amazing. And we worked with the Muslim parents in fixing this problem for children. The next week, Kevin called me in and said, Trevor, thank you so much for helping us. How can we help you? What can we do for you? That's how it works. I said, well, I don't really know. He said, we are required by law to teach Christian education in the school. By law. Would you become our Christian teacher? Nah. Of course. Kevin is a person of peace. Do you know, I wish I could tell you. I'm not going to get through my other slides. Best of luck. So, but this is how we started something. It always works like this. I can put up slides and give you processes. They'll be there. But it works like this. It works very relationally, on the ground, in the turf. God leading you somewhere, bringing someone alongside who will bless you to get started. Kevin, who's the head teacher, is a beautiful man. He's the best non-Christian Christian I've met. Complex, disciple on the way thing. And we became the teacher of Christian faith. He says, if the imam teaches Islam, well then, you, vicar, person, could teach Christianity. And we did it in a very sensitive way. And we did it according to the national rules in Britain, tolerance, respect. But we got to tell our story. And the Muslim children loved it. They were unbelievably, they were way more engaged about Easter than Christians are. They were really excited. And then out of that, he said, how could we help some of the non-Muslim children interact with some of the Christian children in the school? Good question. So I said, what school clubs do you run? Schools run clubs, don't they? And they didn't have an art club. And in my team, 3 artists had joined the team. I said, why don't we do an art club for the children? So we used what we had. What's in your hand? Moses, what's in your hand? Your staff. We had 3 art teachers. And we made a club called Create, in which we used art, including religious art, to share stories of history and share stories of our city together by using art in a way that allowed the children to discuss Christian paintings and also other paintings that were not Christian in dialogue together. And this became a beautiful thing where we could freely talk about faith. The parents loved it, and they began to ask more about who we are. And that led to another thing, and led to another thing, and led to another thing, and led to another thing. Each one a step that I had no idea was going to happen. Discernment comes on the way, never before. I never get a download of how to start a church. I take a step, like Paul and Troas, I take a step, nope, it's not here. Okay, let's go to Bithynia. Nope, it's not here. Oh, rubbish. I'm now at the beach. Where am I going to go now? It's here. God takes me on this meander, and I work out where I should be. And God told me I would be there. So we then were asked to do parenting things with the parents. We did some counseling. We were then asked to run Christian services. The head teacher said, could you run a Christian expression of church here? No. But this was a long relational process. And every door that opened, we went through it. And we piggybacked, I don't know if that worked, but we backed on to whatever else opened. And we did it with a posture of humility. A posture that we were not there to convert these kids. A posture that if we loved them well enough and they respected us, like Lydia, God would open up the heart. And we're still there. And we are loved and embraced. And the Muslim families love us. And if they see anything of Jesus in us, this is great. And the fact that they have adopted us as their Christian church, and the parents brought us under some very difficult circumstances with the bombing in Manchester. I can't tell you how, because the bomber was in the local mosque. The person who blew up the people in the Manchester bomb, he was actually in our local mosque. We knew him. And so the families went to the same mosque. This was crisis. And we worked with that for the whole school. We led them in acts of remembrance, and we helped them to express their grief. This whole gospel thing, it wasn't just about, save these children's souls. What does it look like for the kingdom of God to be in that school? And when we've run Easter services and Christingle services, I don't know if you know what that is, and other things, we now have Muslim families who come to hear about Jesus. I can't put that in a little box, but it looks something like that. And it's the same everywhere I go. The process, I would say, is learning about the community, getting to know the facts, loving service well, and out of loving service, opportunities will arrive to have faith conversations and explorations that lead into the forming of community. These are my friends. And I grew up in a society where these would have been my enemies. But what does it mean in the story of the Good Samaritan to love the other? Jesus was pretty good at that. I think I'm pretty much done. To see that second workshop, who gives a stuff? But it's there. This is real stuff, and I much prefer these questions. If you look at the slides, are we done at 3? Is that correct? What time are we done at? 3. Okay. So I'd rather just tell you some of those stories and those principles in the turf, getting to know it, love it, serve it. People respond to that. God will bring you people who will open that and see where the journey goes. And before you know it, as people respond to something about the good news that they see or hear, they will form friendship. And out of friendship will form spiritual conversation. And out of spiritual conversation comes faith. And out of faith comes a community. And it's like that. It's as simple as that and as hard as that. Thank you all.